So we're looking at learning outcome 3 today, which is understanding the relationships between teachers and other professionals in education and training. And in this section, you're looking at 3 assessment criteria. 3.1 is explain how the teaching role involves working with other professionals. 3.2, explain the boundaries between the teaching role and other professional roles. And 3.3 is describe points of referral to meet the individual needs of learners. So get onto the correct PowerPoint, which is this. There. So when we're looking at our roles and responsibilities and our relationships, we just need to actually understand what our roles are, what the responsibilities and what the relationships are. So the aim of this unit is actually just here to help you to understand what your role is, what your responsibilities are, what the responsibilities of a teacher or a trainer in education is, and what the relationship there is between the different professionals and how you can sort of work together and help each other. Right, so 3.1, explain how the teaching role involves working with other professionals. And now you'll know that when you're working within your school environment, there are a multitude of professionals that you're working with. You might be working with associate staff, teaching staff, admin, you might be working with the senior leadership team. There's even organizations that will come in. So if you're working within early years, sometimes you have dentists come in to show the little ones how to brush their teeth or give them a few tips and even hand out a few toothbrushes and toothpastes. So it can be a lot of different people that you work with. Even sometimes when you have, sorry, Geeta?
Sorry, no, nothing for you.
Okay.
Sorry.
I was just going to say, when you're working with computers on a daily basis, you've got ICT technicians that you'll get in touch with, and you might notice that on a lot of plugs and computers and iPads, you get these little green labels on them, and they're pat tested, so they've got to do those on a yearly basis just to actually be able to, it's these here.
Yeah.
Yeah. So without these, we can't use the equipment safely. So when you're working with other professionals, you'll either work with other teachers or trainers, associate staff, which includes teaching assistants, administration staff, cleaning, catering, caretakers, technicians, head teachers, senior leaderships. You sometimes, at the moment, we've got that national tutoring program. I'm not sure if it's been introduced in your school or not. But in a lot of the schools that I'm in contact with, I know that they're doing a lot of the tutoring program where students will stay after school, the younger ones from, say, year 1, 2 up to year 11. They're having after-school sessions where there'll be a member of staff there with them, but that member of staff isn't actually teaching them. It's another person behind a screen, setting them work and assessing them. Sometimes you can have a... So it is quite good because my niece has actually had this. She fell back a little bit because of all the lockdown that was happening. But now she's coming back up to the standards that she was at originally. So it is quite beneficial to have this. Okay. You'll have staff at the venue. So if you go on class trips or like year 4 go swimming, you'll have your swimming instructors, or sometimes you'll get a coach coming in to do PE with your students. Then you might even have social services or nurses or physiotherapists, depending on what the needs are. Within this, all of this, the reason that you actually even work with other professionals is because you're trying to keep up with the welfare of the student. You want to make sure that they're getting all of their needs and requirements are being catered for. That if there's, say, a student that may have need physiotherapy or may need external assistance or something to help them with their behavioural issues, there is somebody in there that is actually coming in to give you a hand so that you know how to make sure that you're keeping an eye on these students and helping them in the best possible way. So, in all of this, your teaching role, in total, what does it involve? So you've got certain duties, and these duties can actually be helped when you're working with other professionals. So they can help you to contribute to planning. Now, I'll actually give you a bit of a backstory. I remember my very first paid job that I was working. Completely, all I'd done is volunteer work before this. I went in as a teaching assistant, and the first job I got was doing a one-to-one with a young child who'd had a head injury. He'd been knocked over while he was on a bike. He didn't have a helmet on, so it really affected. So he had a brain injury, and it really affected his behaviour, changed his personality, and he could get quite aggressive. Now, within that, when I first went in, I had no clue of exactly the severity of his needs. The school hadn't really disclosed everything to what they should have, which unfortunately can be the case because they want staff in and they don't want to scare people off to start off with. There was an incident where he became violent, and he was a small child, very slim built. He was in year 4 at the time, and he became a little bit violent. And then after that, we had a behavioural psychologist came in to work with me and with this young student. Now, she worked with him, over a period of time, and the best thing that I ever had was her coming in, because she came in, she gave me so many tips and techniques and little bits to look out for, so I could see what his triggers were, what was setting him off, what environment was best to avoid. And it really helped me to contribute my planning and how I handled his behaviour. So I'm a very firm believer of working with external agencies because they can really help you.
Yeah.
Within this, when you're working with other people or other professionals, they can help you to research things. So if you're not 100% sure on how to support, say, a blind student who needs to have worksheets in Braille, somebody might come in and actually give a member of staff that training so they can actually start doing it for them. You can share your assessment outcomes, you can communicate with each other. And again, remember, this is within your school environment and out of your school environment. You can negotiate support for students, contribute to internal quality assurance, and liaise with any referral agencies. So these are good bits on here that will what they help you to do. So on here, because you're in a school environment now, can you think of any professionals you work with and how you actually work with them?
Professionals means any coming from outside or within the school?
Any, inside, outside. Yeah.
Yeah, I do remember having, I forgot her name, I think it's JB, and she came for like giving us training for phonics in the school. So to all the staff members and, using articulations while teaching. Yeah. So we went through with the training for that. Apart from, we have many trainings from senior leadership team, which we went through.
So that's good because then you got that experience of, was it for Read Write Ink? Is that the system that you've implemented in your school?
For phonics?
Yeah, because it's become quite popular now, hasn't it? With all these different systems that are in place, yeah. So that's good. Because then you've got that training, so you're passing on your knowledge in a correct way to your students, and you're getting all that extra training from your leadership team, wherever they see that it needs doing. So even generalized things like safeguarding, which we have to go through every few years, you keep up to date. So do you have any questions for 3.1?
Just as we are saying, teaching role when all working with other professionals. So I can write as many as we have gone through, isn't it?
Yes.
While considering the welfare of the children, of course.
So on this section, what I want you to do is talk about what the teaching role is. So is there to make sure you're planning and catering and being inclusive and differentiating your work for your students' needs. And then you can talk about how you work with other professionals. So you can talk about, this is what you do on this little section here. So this is what your main job is. and then you can talk about how you work with other professionals, or you can just put in an example of the time you had that training with your senior leadership team, or the time you had your phonics training with Debbie, and make a nice detailed example just explaining how you worked with that person.
Okay.
So just like one paragraph on what you're actually meant to be doing and how you work with others, and then an example to support it.
Okay.
So 3.2, explain the boundaries between the teaching role and other professional roles. So we know that we do have boundaries within our work. Now, the boundaries that I had when I was working in a primary school, and then I've worked with children and I've worked with their parents where I've run specialized courses to assist those parents where I've created everything from scratch. Now, the boundaries that I had there are completely different to what I've got here. Now, in those situations, I would never make a phone call to my learners because there's young students. If we had a parents' meeting, it would be slightly different where we do face-to-face or we go over Zoom. So I never have, depending on your role, it really depends on how your boundaries change. Now I'm in contact, emailing, WhatsApping, texting, making phone calls. So really, again, it depends on where you work and what your position is. So within the basic, I've just done a generalized boundaries on here. So for a teacher, contacting your student, depending on which setting you're in. So for example, if I want to get in touch with you, I could give you one phone call, but I'm not going to keep on calling you consistently over time and harassing you and saying, Geeta, come get in touch with me. Like last week, I think it was Monday or Tuesday, I made a couple of phone calls to my students, the ones that I needed to get in touch with. And there were a few that I couldn't get in touch with. Now, on a normal basis, if I was working in a primary school, I wouldn't be able to pass my number on and say, hey, give me a call on my mobile and we'll speak when you're free. But with this case, because I'm working with adults, I just left a message and saying, I'm trying to get in touch with you regarding this. I'm looking to restructure my lessons. Give me a call. And she just gave me a call back 5 minutes before I started this lesson. So, but if I constantly called her every single day, that would be me overstepping and harassing her.
Yeah.
In a school environment, if you need to get in touch with a parent of one of your students, you probably go over to the office staff, wouldn't you, and let them know what the issue is, and then they'd get in touch for you.
Yeah.
So your boundaries within your teaching role, so these are your personal boundaries now. So you're going to follow your job description, and that's it. It's going to be like, this is what my job description is. You might go above and beyond, but that's different. You're going to look at what your own personal skills are. Now, if you were to come to me and say, I should go and teach GCSE maths, I would be way over my head. I would have no clue what to do. I'd be like, so you've got to make sure that you're following what your own skills are. Follow your own experience. Look at your time. If you're stuck for time, if you know you've got a certain few tasks that you need to do, you've got to really keep an eye on what your time is and not take on anything else. And then again, plan in accordance to what you have. So if you want to do this really good science experiment at school with the children, make it fun, make like volcanoes or things, you've got to look at what do you physically have at school. What sort of resources do you have? Are you able to do that, or do you need to tone it back a little bit? Then you've got your professional boundaries. So again, you're going to be following a job description again. So what can you or can you not do? Now, as a working within schools for the amount of years that I've worked in. Now, technically, if you're working as a teaching assistant at level 1 or a level 2, you're not really allowed to take a class on by yourself. You shouldn't really be left on your own. You shouldn't be taking over. But because of staff shortages and so on, I had my level 3 qualifications, but I was working as a level 1 in some places because of proximity and ease. So I joined those jobs. I went as a level 1. And once some schools will see that you have a certain qualification or you can do certain things, you will get pushed beyond your boundaries and you will be asked to take classes and things, which legally you're not meant to be doing, but sometimes it does happen. So you might have found yourself in situations where you're probably going above and beyond what your physical role is actually meant to be.
Okay.
So you've got your team roles and responsibilities. So what is your role? What is your responsibility? What is my role? What is my responsibility? And we're delegating our tasks in that way. So I'm not doing your job, you're not doing my job. We help each other, that's different. But if you're taking over all of my duties and I'm just sitting back and not doing anything, then that's not fair on you. You've got to look at your management structures as well. So sometimes you will be asked to do things that are slightly above what is normal for you, or you might be asked to do something different, but you've got to see what your management structure is and what they actually require you to do. And lines of communication, this is an important one, I think, where you're communicating with each other and you're making sure that you actually know what's going on. Now, some staff work full-time, some work part-time, some will be able to attend the twilight meetings that you have after school. Some go home because they've got childcare or they only work a few hours a day. Now, for a person that's working part-time, sometimes what will happen is that they're missing out on a lot of important information because they're not getting it reiterated to them. Maybe it's not being emailed to them about the minutes of the meeting or what actually happened, and they're scrambling trying to get information. So it's very important that you have clear lines of communication, even if it's just a small post-it stuck into their tray and saying, these are the points we went over, talk to me when you're free, and that's it. So do you have any questions regarding this little section?
Can I ask one thing? You know, when you just talk about professional boundaries there,
yes,
like team roles and management structure. Well, team role is something like we should be working together, isn't it? But where does boundaries come there? Like, you know.
If the boundaries comes within, so if you've got your team role and you know that you're doing certain things, but if you're overstepping or if you're asked to do something that's not within, so sometimes within team roles, what will happen is you'll all be given a certain task, but then, or certain jobs that you're all meant to be doing. So, for example, if it's at the end of the year in September, in July, and you're getting in touch with a new intake for September, say the nursery children that are coming in. So you'll be given a set of phone numbers or things, and you'll be saying, okay, you know, Geeta, give these people a call. Now, what will happen is if you ignore your duties, if you don't bother calling them, or if you phone them and then you start making personal comments and saying, oh yeah, this teacher's like this, but you got to watch, this one can be quite lazy. So you got to make sure that you're still staying within your professionalism, that you're not making comments that are derogatory and that you're not pushing other people to be more uncomfortable, is what I'm trying to say in this section.
Okay.
Is that clear? I can explain a bit better if that doesn't make sense.
But that is with something not within the team, isn't it? Because if you are calling parents or something, that is, well, that's a responsibility, but you're calling the parents, isn't it?
Yeah, but if you're working within an early years department, so if you're in nursery, for example, if you're working within there, everybody's going to be given their own jobs, aren't they? Some might actually physically go out and say there'll be a teacher and a teaching assistant that will actually go out and do house visits. But your role within that team might be just to make sure that you can set the appointments for those times and maybe translate and ask what their requirements are. Do they need a translator? So you're all working together so that one task can follow the other.
Okay. And what about in management structures?
Now, management structures, now this really works in a different way. So with management structures, sometimes you'll have teachers that are within the senior leadership team. And like within a classroom environment that I had, my year one teacher when I was working as a TA, she was actually the overall senior leadership team member of Key Stage 1. Now, so she kept an eye on year one, year two, and so on with those. Now, she would be in the class at some time, so she'd have a couple of hours in the morning within the classroom environment, and then she'd be off in the afternoons to do things. Now, what will happen is within the management structures, if the management is actually working as a teacher as well, this will impact on how you work within your own role, within your own classroom environment. Because in the times that she's absent, she might be delegating her tasks. They might be giving you different sort of ideas and saying, right, Asha or Geeta or, Karen or Lindsay, whatever it is, you guys need to do this, that, and the other. So you're sort of picking up a little bit of slack and you've got your own duties. But again, within the management structure also works is if you've got certain requirements that you've got to be doing. So sometimes what will happen is that you'll have certain tasks and things that they'll ask you to do. So some management will be saying, right, we've all got clear-cut roles and that's it. You're going to be teaching this class. You're a teaching assistant for here. You're an associate member of staff. You're in admin. But within other management structures, they expect you to be dropping things at a hat and saying, right, this morning you're working in year 1, you might have to go on to year 5 later on. So you've got to be a bit more pliable depending on what their own requirements are. So that's what I'm trying to communicate in that aspect.
But that won't be called as flexibility?
It will be flexibility, yeah.
Positive?
Yeah, it is. Because within that, even there's a certain boundary still within that, because if you're working as a level 1 teaching assistant and you've been set into a year 5 class where you'll be the sole member of staff, there should be a boundary in place because you're not at that position. You might not be qualified to take a full class on. Legally, you shouldn't be taking a full class on because as a level 1 and a level 2, you're meant to actually just be there to assist, to deliver interventions, to help out, to be an additional member of staff. So there are certain boundaries still within place that you shouldn't be expected to pass over and to push. And again, it will still be carrying on with how you're behaving when you're in class as well. So you might go in and you're comfortable and say, right, yeah, I'm comfortable, I can take this class and so on. But if you're going in there and you're ignoring students or you're telling them to shut up or to be quiet and sit down and you're pushing beyond the norms, then that is the boundary you need to be looking at as well.
Okay.
So for here, actually, can you think of an example where you might have seen a boundary being overstepped or some boundaries being put in place?
Well, recently I can say the teacher I work with, she was quite rude.
Mm-hmm.
The way of talking, not only with me, with the children, I can say, but with me, yes, she told me something on my face, which she shouldn't have.
Yeah.
So, in terms of that, then of course that comes, we work as a team, but still we have our boundaries that we should not cross. So, I went to SLT team and talked about it.
Good, yeah. Because there's certain comments like when you're at work, there should be a certain level of professionalism. I always say you don't have to get on with each other. You don't have to like each other. But when you're in the work environment, you should be respectful of each other and not make silly, derogatory remarks that will upset another person. There's no need for it. And you did the right thing by going in. Now, I remember there was a time where I worked one-to-one with a young child, and we had and with this child, I was outside at lunchtimes with him. Now, within this, we had a lunch lady who was very friendly with the child's mother. So anything that she saw him do. Now, children, at school, sometimes they can act up, sometimes they can be silly. They're different at home, they're different at school. And not everything needs to be passed on to the parents. Now, every single thing that she saw him do, if he'd run off away from me or he'd do a bit of hiding, and he liked to tease me where he'd hid for a bit, but then he'd come back always. So anything he did, she would go and pass it on to his mum, even if it's the smallest thing. And then he came to me one day and said, I keep getting told off because my mum knows that I did this, that, and the other. And I just ended up having, a few weeks later, a conversation with that the lunch lady, I didn't know that it was her was passing information. And she said, oh, yeah, I know his mum, and I told her this, and I told her that, and it was completely out of line, because she shouldn't be telling silly little things. Parents do need to know information, but they don't need to know every tiny little thing, because even if it's the best behaved child in school, you know there'll be a time where they might be a little bit cheeky, or they might talk back a little bit, or they might refuse to do their work. But it has an adverse effect depending on what the family is like. You've got different cultures, different perspectives. Sometimes parents might take things a little bit too far, depending on what their own culture is. Sometimes they might not be too bothered. But in this instance, it was really affecting his home life. So I had to say to her, I'm like, you can't be passing on everything. It doesn't matter if you're friends or not. And then you need to keep some things quiet. But she still carried it on. So in the end, it was something that carried on over months and months. And then in the end, I just had to go to, like you did, I had to go to the senior leadership team and make a complaint. This is what's happening. I've spoken to her directly, and she's still refusing to do it, and it's affecting this child. So that in that place, she was overstepping her boundaries. She was doing something that she was not within her job role. She was there to supervise the children, and I was there to keep an eye on this young child one-to-one. So if there's any issue, I was dealing with it, and I could have continued dealing with it, but she was putting a lot of pressure on. So, yeah. So on 3.2, this is quite a simple one to explain. All I want you to do is put down a nice detailed example of when you've seen a boundary that's being overstepped and how you've got that addressed. So when, like, you had your other class teacher who's been quite rude to you and said something in front of the students, that's a boundary that she overstepped. And then you've gone and you've reported it, rightly so. So maybe you can put down an example or something like that, or whatever you feel comfortable about. You don't have to share names. It's just generic information about, So are you okay with this section now?
Okay, yeah. So just with a detailed example should be enough for the whole answer?
Yes, yes. Because then you're just explaining that you know what boundaries are, and then you're giving about how you saw it, what happened, and how you're dealing with it.
Okay.
I mean, too many times I've seen boundaries being overstepped by staff members where they'll think it's okay to tell a student to shut up. And if you've got a student in year 5 and you're telling them to shut up consistently, number one, I would never use that word with any of my students, or adults, regardless. And I remember a child coming up to me about 2 years ago, and they were telling each other to shut up, these 2 year 5 students. They were being quite rude to each other. And I said, that's a horrible word to use. You shouldn't be using it. And they said, why shouldn't we use it? Our class teacher, Miss blah, blah, says this all the time. And I had no answer for them. I couldn't say anything, because it was, they learned from the behavior that they've seen consistently through their year. So it does make a big effect. So on to 3.3, describe the points of referral to meet the individual needs of learners. So when we have lots of learners, you and I know, we know that there's a wide selection of learners with different needs, different requirements. Some will have learning abilities that they need. Some will have physical requirements. And I've seen now as well, when we're in a classroom environment, sometimes what will happen is you're so focused on your students that have additional requirements that need to be pushed up, give them interventions. Sometimes you end up ignoring or passing over the children that are quite capable, and you sort of set them to a task and they've done it in 5 minutes and they're just sitting there doing nothing because they've already completed it and they've done everything correct. So you've got to really try and juggle and try and make sure that you're meeting the needs of everyone. So for this, in this part here, I'm really more focused on the children or the adults that might need a little bit of an extra help. So with this, you need to identify what their needs are. So there's this identification can happen at any time. Now, when you started this course, you would have filled out a few questionnaires, like a learning style one, so that we can look at it, we can see how you learn best. Right at the beginning, you filled out a SWOT analysis for me, where it gives you a nice idea of what your strengths are, what your weaknesses are, and what you're aiming to do. So that was a way for me and for the other tutors to identify what sort of course you're wanting to go down. So any assessments, even at the beginning of the year, whenever you get the students in, you'll always be carrying out assessments at the beginning, through the middle, so sort of every termly, you've got some type of assessment. You'll see the teachers there with the little clipboards and ticking things and getting them to their phonics. So once you've learned what your learners actually need, what identification you made for them, you've actually got to go and try and cater to that now. You've got to plan your work. You've got to differentiate it. You need to make sure that you've got the correct resources in. So if you've got, say, a number of, say, 10, 12 children that are left-handed, and you've only got 5 pairs of left-handed scissors, you need to go and make sure that everybody does have one and it's actually accessible to their table, that they've got it like on a pot in the middle, or that they know where to go and get it. Now, if they've got issues where they're slightly visually impaired, you can do simple things like just get them to sit towards the front of the classroom. So these are things that you'll do on a basic level yourself. But with some learners, you might need to refer them to a specialist or an agency, or sometimes you'll notice that a child might have learning requirements, or you'll see that this child looks like they've got traits of autism. So you want to put in a referral to try and get them assessed, so that you can get additional help come in and funding in, so you can get a one-to-one tutor or a teacher to come and help them. And again, like Anna Gravels, now Anna Gravels, you'll see her quite a lot. It's she's written a book about teaching and learning. And she says, refer your learner to an appropriate specialist or agency if you can't deal with their needs.
Okay.
So sometimes when you think that a student has a particular need, now I know there was a student of mine who came up to me, who spoke to me quite candidly in the very first lesson, and she said to me, I have ADHD, and I thought I'd make you aware of that. Now, I wasn't 100% sure of how ADHD actually referred to learning and working, so I had to go and research it. I had to go and find out a bit more additional information so that I can tweak her lessons and make sure that I'm not overloading her with information. Because I know it's not the same for everybody that has ADHD, but some learners that have ADHD find it difficult to start a task or get focused on something. Or if they get information overload, it's like, no, I can't do it. So I had to do a bit of research. So even within that, what I felt that it was within my scope of teaching. But again, there's probably something that I could get professional help with and say, okay, can I get some techniques and tips on how I can support the student? So there is things. So as Gravel says again, it's best to seek advice or refer your learners to someone who can help, somebody that's got a lot more experience. Now, what you'll find is that whenever you're in a school environment, you'll have a lot of teaching assistants that are hired as, especially nowadays, everybody is hired as a specialist one-to-one TA, even if they're working in, within Manchester this is happening, I'm not sure within any other cities, but even if they're doing a generalised classroom where they're being the class TA, they're still hired as a SEN TA. Now, a lot of professionals are trained and a lot of them are not. Like when I went into my very first SEN role, I was not trained into any of those. I had generalized classroom training and that was it, but I never worked one-to-one. So you will get situations where staff members might not be trained to do the job that they're actually doing, or they could get better training.
Yeah.
So when you have those type of things, obviously you might want to get additional training. I remember there was a young student who was blind that was starting from nursery. So what they did was they got a TA that was currently working with us at that time, and she applied for the job and to get this separate position, and she learned how to read Braille, and she taught him how to read Braille. So she spent by the time, so the nursery time where he was just doing a lot of playing, by the time he was in reception where she could teach him the basics, she'd already learned it. She'd had a year's worth of training with an additional specialist that had come in. So that was a referral that had been made, and the specialist had been brought into school to actually come and assist her and give her lessons. And it was a lot of hard work that she had to do and a lot of additional hours outside of school that she had to do, but it was fantastic that with the training she got this new skill. So when you've identified what your students need, you need to actually follow your organizations, your school systems and procedures. So there's a lot of different things that you can do. Now, you can contact the administration team and they'll probably be able to put you in touch. Or more or less what we would do is speak to the senior leadership team and say, this is the issue, and I think that we need an external agency or a point of referral. And then they'll start the steps and do it. With these referrals, you'll probably end up getting additional learning support. You might, if you're in a college or a sixth form or adult education, you might end up getting student services where you're getting additional help that way. Sometimes, like what I did was when I had the student telling me that she had particular learning needs, you might go onto websites and do a bit of search, or you might even ask your colleagues and say, get peer help and say, right, I've got this issue. What do you think I can do? Do you have any tips for me? I mean, I'm a firm believer in speaking to colleagues, especially ones that have a lot more experience than you. You can always gain something out of it. Then external agencies that you can have referrals to, so you can get specialist support like speech therapy, physiotherapy, behavior psychologists, like I told you, the lady that came in that gave me a lot of help. You've got government agencies. Sometimes you might need to work with social services if there's an issue that you might have noticed, or issue of neglect, or a disclosure might have been made to you. You might need to work with NHS, so you might have community nurses coming in. So if there's a child, for example, that has physiotherapy to strengthen his muscles, he might go into appointments to go and do that, but then that physiotherapist can come into school and give you tips on how to continue the same exercises. And then you probably know all these sites as well. So, you know, Twinkle, TES, BBC, all of these where we get our extra resources off, or any activity ideas and so on with them.
Yeah.
And then you've got your employers as well, so your local council. So if you're in a council or a state school, then you've got your local council. But if you're working for a private organization, you might be the business that owns your organization. Like we've got some of the schools around me are owned by cooperative, some are owned by star academies, but mainly they're state schools where they're just owned by and run by Manchester City Council. So have you got any thing you want to go over for 3.3?
So in 3.3, basically, that's the main thing, that we identify the needs of the children, or then second step is like how we want to overcome them. Yes? Yes. We can seek help from the colleagues, we can search for the tips or any help we can get ourselves. But then the third step is if it's not helping or anything, if it's, naturally it's not making any progress, then we approach the senior leadership, yes? And then they assess, and they approach the local education department from the council. Yes. Where the specialists come and assess the child.
And unfortunately, that can take a very long, from start to finish, it can take months to actually even get that done. So in the meantime, you'd probably still be trying to do things while that assessment is taking place. So you're sort of left in the lurch in the middle, but once the assessment has been done, it is quite beneficial, yeah.
Okay. So once
And
they step in, then of course we get specialist help
yeah,
coming up to school.
yes.
Okay.
Now, the best referrals are made in the most timely referrals are actually made in nurseries and preschools because I like the system that there are preschools that are available from 2A children from 2A plus, because by the time they get into mainstream school, they're not wasting in effect a certain amount of years. I knew a little boy, a family friend who is autistic. He's an adult now, but his nursery, the one that he went to, the preschool, they were fantastic. Before he even stepped foot into a mainstream school, his referral had been made. He'd got assistance. He'd got financial um, secured so that he could go to a specialist school. So he didn't have that time where you have that disruption where a child goes to one school, they get used to it, but then they see that they can't meet the child's needs, and then they end up referring them to a specialist school. So it's always fantastic if you can get things pinpointed as early as possible.
Yes.
So, question for you: can you think of a time where a referral has had to be made, if it's small or large, regardless?
Yes. A child in my class was having quite a lot of behavior issues. So it was very hard to say that what was exactly. I know the child was like very hyper, and in fact in reception even the child was very strong. So he used to just throw the tables and chairs here and there. Any child, if it's playing, he'll just push them, hit them, and run. So it was very hard to catch him. So then what the school did at reception time, they just took the child only for the half day. So at lunchtime we used to send the child back home and having one-to-one TA with the child. So because the behavior issues were very much to a level where he was pushing the teacher and hitting them and kicking them as well. So then the school decided that we can't keep the child in our school.
Yeah.
But by the time everything was going through the council and everything, so the year one started. And in year one, when he came in my class, the teacher I was having, she was very tactful. And she managed that child so brilliantly that the child started listening, started reacting. And it was like, teacher did kind of supported the child kind of one-to-one. But she did not ignore the other class as well. But she managed that child so well that, everything was start coming on place. That child was learning very well. He was listening to the teacher. Whereas in between the day, there were days that he was not happy or something was happening. But he used to listen to the teacher only then, anything. But that year one went quite smoothly. I can say first 2 months were a little bit upsetting and all that.
Yeah.
But after that, he was very well settled. But again, the time came that in year two when he moved, then again things start becoming a little bit worse.
Yeah.
So, but that child says, sorry?
I was going to say it's probably because he built a really good rapport and relationship with that teacher, and then he's gone into year two and everything's different again. He's not got the same staff, so it can be quite unsettling, yeah. But it's wonderful to see that. I was just going to say, it's wonderful to see that how a member of staff, how one person can make such a big difference. It really pinpoints and how your own behaviours will reflect on the children as well.
Yes. Yes. Of course, there was some statement as well, which I'm not aware of, because as again in communication, they don't declare each and everything to us.
No, yeah.
But yes, there was some, school was planning that we can't keep that child because he was hitting and, the behavior was really worse. But again, there are many children in our school which is having statements. So they are even physically or mentally growth or dyslexia or other things. So we have got specialists coming for speech and language for many children from the council, which are helping them on, on regular basis. So they are giving the points or guiding the TAs how to support them, what they need to do, and what they need to be recording, or anything happen, what they need to do. So it's like ongoing process, which whole year they are observing and assessing them.
That's good. That is fantastic. Now, for 3.3, have we discussed how we want you to answer this?
Nope.
No, I'm thinking. So on here, what I'd like you to do is just talk about generalized how, just a paragraph about there's learners with diverse range of needs, that everybody is different and that we need to cater to lots of different needs. So they might be very enhanced, where they might be quite bright and above their expectations, and then again it might be where they have additional requirements or learning requirements where they might have dyslexia or behavioral issues. So talk about a paragraph, a nice deep paragraph about that, and then put down an example. So a lot of these, you'll notice, can be answered with examples because you're in the work environment and we want to see that you understand what we're talking about. So examples are a great way to do it. So just talk about how a statement of needs has been made for this child, how it's in the process and in between what your class teachers have done and what you have done to support him.
Okay.
And that's it for that.
Okay.
So in total, we've looked at the teaching role and how it involves working with other professionals. We looked at what the boundaries are between the teaching role and the other professionals. And then we looked at the points of referral and how to meet the individual needs of learners on here. So going back to the boundaries little section, for example, you're meant to be doing what your own job description is, and you will have points where you do go above and beyond, but you're not actually meant to be taking on a management role, or you're not meant to be taking on an administration role. So you've got to make sure that you're working, just talk about how, what boundaries are in place and what sort of roles you're expected to do that are within your boundaries, and then talk about a time that a boundary might have been overstepped, like you had with that staff member that was being viewed. So yeah.
Okay.
I'll turn this off. I've actually got something to